At IUPUI, there's an Introduction to Motorsports course in the Motorsports Engineering program in which they devote one specific lecture to the history of motorsport. Of course, they're going to focus in more on the engineering side of things, focusing in on key moments or key shifts over time in technology, safety, what have you. We're going to use the same framework in this course, but instead we're going to use that key stakeholder diagram that we talked about beforehand and look at the changing role of media, how sanctioning bodies have evolved, how events and venues have changed over time, how sponsorship has changed from origins to today. Also focusing on participants and spectators, how those have evolved over time. So instead of focusing on the engineering changes throughout history of motorsport, we're going to focus in on these key stakeholders that we talked about in the very first discussion. In particular, for these video lectures on the history of motorsport, we'll focus more on the global and national level forms of motorsport. If I asked this question in an on-campus lecture, the students would probably struggle at first coming up with reasons for why we do study history. And very simply, why we study history is so we can understand present but also future patterns. We'll focus in on those key dates. And so just like in geography, you might study the key locations, the key capitals, the key countries. In history, it's the key events or the key dates that over time have played an integral role in how we view motorsport today and where it's going in the future. So history definitely has a key role, and we'll use history throughout the rest of this semester. We'll come back to these key ideas, these key events over time. So when was the first ever race? Well, it's hard to precisely identify. For example, we've got a movie from 1959, Ben-Hur, which depicts a scene from Jesus' time. So 2,000 years ago in Rome, a chariot race. And so we could say, well, that could be the first race, kind of this era. But Richard Petty once said, well, when was the first race? Well, was when the second car was made, because obviously people would want to compete head-to-head with their new car. Here we have what is believed to be the first ever self-propelled vehicle, a steam engine from France in 1790. Think about that. That's just after the United States became a country, so a long, long time ago. Simple idea here with the steam is we have to constantly add fuel or some mechanisms to heat this big water tank in the front, which then, of course, helps to expand air, cause pistons to move, crankshafts to turn, wheels to turn, and all of that good stuff. And so this also is why the origins of the term chauffeur. So chauffeur we think of today as someone who drives us around, but as you would drive this vehicle, as you would move it around, you had to have someone constantly adding fuel, someone constantly adding something to then heat up this water. So here we can understand also the origins of a French term. Now what's key to this is in France is where we see a lot of the early origins of these self-propelled vehicles of various forms. Moving on, about 100 years later, we have an electric-powered vehicle that set the land speed record. And so we have this new era of electric cars in this modern 21st century. Well, the electric car, it's been around for a long, long time. Whereas the steam engine, the problem was it was just a lot of inputs. You really couldn't go too far because it's so heavy, and you always had to be having something to add to the fuel, to add to the heat, and it became cumbersome. Now with batteries, same idea. Battery technology wasn't like it is today, and so these batteries were massive suckers. And so because of that, these were quite heavy. And over time, you run out of your charge. And so what won out was the next vehicle, the internal combustion engine that is gas-powered. Here we have Karl Benz, who, this is actually debated whether or not it's him or a guy named Daimler, who we know today as Daimler Chrysler. Both of them actually, on the same day in Germany, took their idea of an internal combustion engine to the German patent office. So it's debated on which one's the first, but this is the first one that had wheels and kind of the setup that we would think of today, even though it's obviously three wheels. And so in Germany is actually where we see the first ever internal combustion engine. engine, which now, because all you had to do is just add fuel, it now allows drivers, riders to go farther distances. And so they're not like the steam engine, so heavy, so kind of stuck in place, or the electric engine, where it's just kind of however long your battery would last. Here, you could go much longer distances. And so this is why this particular this invention won out in terms of which vehicle we see today. Quickly summarizing what we just talked about, but also adding some new information. The origins of motorsport can be tied to origins in automotive technologies, whether they be steam, electric, or gas or internal combustion engines. And so where did this occur? If we go back to use history, the Industrial Revolution in Western Europe, but also the United States, occurred there in the 1850s to 1900s. And so that's really where we saw innovations, new ideas, new technologies, new materials. And so the Industrial Revolution was key to kickstarting a lot of these innovations. Now, where's the Industrial Revolution happening? It's happening in Brazil, India, China. And where are we seeing new automotive manufacturers come from? We're seeing them coming from those countries that are moving through the Industrial Revolution at the moment. So historically, we can go and tie this to those key eras that you would talk about in a history class. Further, kind of the relevancy of motorsport. We've got these new ideas, these new technologies. So these new technologies then had to be marketed to new individuals because these are expensive. Going back to the previous discussion we had, motorsport is expensive. New technology costs money. And so as people came up with new ideas, they also had to make some money to help fund these ideas. And so the inventors of these various technologies then became sellers of their vehicles as well, sellers of their ideas, so that they can come up with new ideas, new projects, what have you. Now, when we go back to the 1800s, many different individuals were coming up with their own inventions and their own ideas. Today, comparatively, we just have a few automotive manufacturers, a few automotive innovators. Back in the old days, there were so many different people that had their ideas. Here is just a mix of various key names of individuals who were very much tied to motorsport, but also tied to early automotive innovations. All these names, for the most part, we still see today.